Thank you for joining me for my devotions this morning. And today I'll be reading from Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And it's part of our story for this coming Sunday of Pentecost and the movement of God's Spirit. And so let us hear the story, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house with where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and the tongue rested on each of them, and all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretians and Arabs. In our own languages we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." The pouring out of the Holy Spirit. One of the things that's interesting about this story is it says that we had people from all over the known world. One of the things that was taking place here is, back in the story of Genesis, we heard with the Tower of Babel that they were confused, and so they were all speaking, granted, different languages, so that they couldn't work together quite so easily to cause trouble, is basically the story. But now, the Holy Spirit is given, and it's a spirit of guidance. It's a Holy Spirit, a Spirit of God that is poured out into people so that we can be one. Just as we talked about last Sunday, that we might be one, that this one in God, and that the mighty works of God could be proclaimed. So God made it possible that Peter, who never studied another language in his life, could speak to those folks. That James and John and Bartholomew and Matthew and James the son of Alphaeus and so on. All of these folks. Now we're also talking not just those 12, but the women that were there in the upper room that we've heard about, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and James and the other brothers of Jesus were all filled with this Spirit and went out into the community proclaiming the mighty works of God. The story of Acts is amazing because in this way, God had gathered all these people from across the known world in Jerusalem for Pentecost, which was an early harvest festival of the Jews. 50 days after Passover is when it would take place. And so this is not just a Christian celebration, but also a Jewish one. And so people came to gather to give their offerings for the early harvest and to give thanksgiving to God. And so they came from wherever they lived. And God chose this moment when all these people were gathered from around the known world in worship, in celebration, to pour out the Spirit of God. And we're told that after Peter preached, that there were about 3,000 souls who became Christian that morning, that day. And then they devoted themselves with the apostles to prayer and to learning the story of God before they dispersed back again to their hometowns. Think about it as like seeds scattering in the wind. Now, as the story goes on, we will hear about how God forces these faithful Jews to consider their Gentile brothers and sisters as equals. And so there are things that the Spirit requires. And so the Spirit talks to Peter and makes him and convinces him through an image 3 times of foods that had always been forbidden for Jews to eat. And God saying, rise, kill and eat in order. And Peter saying, no, if this is a faith test, I'm a faithful Jew. And God says, no, I want you, what I've made clean, I don't want you to call unclean. And so now, all of a sudden, God is sending Peter out to be able to be with other Gentiles, people who were not Jewish, to be able to share meal fellowship with them, to be able to share the mighty works of God, and to have nothing to bar that way. We hear the story of Philip and how he's compelled to go out to the road heading down towards Egypt. And there he meets the Candace, the servant of the Candace of Ethiopia. And he is the steward, and he's the one who's in charge, but he's also a eunuch. Now that might not mean a whole lot to us. But under the Old Testament law, a eunuch was forever an abomination before the Lord. By Old Testament law, nothing could allow this one to be a part of the people of God. But he had been in Jerusalem, and he had been reading in the prophet Isaiah, and he asked Philip, tell me is the prophet talking about himself or someone else? And so Philip told him about Jesus. And then the important thing happened. The eunuch asked Philip, is there anything to prevent me from being baptized? Only the law of God. But Philip said no, because that's what the Spirit directed him to do. And so right then they stopped and they baptized this Ethiopian eunuch, who then went back to his place in Ethiopia, and he, from his position of service, was able to start the Coptic church, a church that fills throughout the Middle East and is a profound witness to the power of God. One man, but it was the Spirit's prompting. The Spirit is always challenging us in our preconceived notions and asking us to step out in faith to do the works of God and to give witness to how God is present in our lives. Our mission statement is saved by grace, led by the Spirit, called to serve. And just like that Ethiopian eunuch, the salvation came in Jesus Christ. Not the fact that his body had been altered at some time earlier in life. But once again, we hear that it's our relationship with God in the Spirit that makes the difference. Saved by grace. As pastor, I can tell you that while I have tried to live a life that is faithful to God in my behavior, in my morality, in my actions, that sinfulness is still a part of me. And it's only by God's grace that I'm empowered to do anything for good. And I recognize it every single day. We are led by the Spirit, which tells that story of grace and mercy for everyone. And then we are called to commit ourselves to service in God's kingdom. That's what the story of Acts is all about. It's the Spirit empowering each and every one of us to tell the story of the power of God's love and its transforming forgiveness. That is something worth telling. Amen.